natural disaster effectively can massively impact human civilization. Things outside of human control bring down even the most advanced societies. They're telling us that these were really small populations of kind of nomadic people exterminating every single big animal. Everything was fine, and then everything wasn't fine in the space of hours. We are saving it for future generations. It still seems bizarre, because why would you make it so big? We kind of think we have everything figured out in our modern world, and we're super, super smart, and we know everything. And these ancient cultures didn't know much. So allow people to speculate. That's what I think.
Okay. All right, we're recording. Michael Button, I'm excited to talk to you because I saw some of your videos that you were doing, and we have a very similar background. So first, you want to talk about your educational background and background in
Yeah.
general?
Yeah. So my name is Michael. For those who don't know me, who's probably the vast majority of your audience. I guess I make YouTube videos about alternative history and ancient history in general, and the whole topic of lost civilizations and the debate that's currently waging regarding, the timeline of human history and how the mainstream portray our prehistoric past. And yeah, I'm very interested in that kind of stuff. So I started making videos about it. But I make these videos from the perspective of someone who has a background in ancient history. So I studied ancient history for 4 years at the University of Birmingham here in the UK. And I came out of that course a little bit disillusioned by how it was taught, and not so much what was included, but more, or not so much the kind of subject matter as was taught, because I thought that was all pretty solid, but it was more the kind of stuff that wasn't taught and the stuff that was left out, which basically was anything that was mildly controversial, or any of these sites that people are debating in this kind of space. And it was during this course that I kind of became aware of the alternative history side of things. So I went into the course completely unaware of these people like Graham Hancock and etc. But during my course, I still started to come across with these theories and get really interested in them, especially considering the kind of mindset that I was surrounded by during my studies, which wasn't like completely like suppressing everything that anyone thought outside the timeline or anything like that, but it was more kind of reluctance to go anywhere that was mildly controversial, and nothing was discussed, like no Gobekli Tepe, barely any ancient Egypt, nothing about South America, nothing about kind of Indonesia or that kind of area of the world. All very Eurocentric, ancient Greece, ancient Rome. Basically, that was it. And that's
Right.
fine, because those things are super interesting and there was lots to learn about that. But I was a little bit disappointed by the lack of kind of, I don't know how to phrase it, but the lack of exploring ideas that were perhaps a little bit more volatile and a little bit more up for debate. It didn't feel like there was anything to contribute, I think would be how I would phrase it. So yeah, that's where I come from. And then didn't decide to proceed with ancient history as a career. Didn't decide to become, I guess the next stage would have been doing a PhD and then eventually becoming a professor. Didn't really want to do that. Kind of got a bit bored is the wrong word, but a little bit kind of weighed down by the constant just repeating facts, and then whoever repeated the facts the best got the best mark and they became the next professor. That wasn't really the vibe that I wanted. Kind of sucked the excitement out of it for me. So I stopped doing ancient history and didn't pursue that as a career. Then a few
Ancient
years down
history
the,
as the field
yeah, as in the
specifically.
field,
Yeah.
yeah, as in, so I didn't, the next step would have been to get a PhD. So I didn't do that.
Right.
I decided to look elsewhere and pursue other opportunities, I guess. Um, so yeah, but then a few years down the line, about half a year ago, 7, 8 months ago, I decided to make a YouTube channel, because these theories have like been in my head ever since, pretty much, and I've been following the debate and following all these figures in this space. And I was like, well, maybe I could have something to contribute here. So I decided to make a few videos, and yeah, I'm doing okay. And here we are today.
Yeah, fantastic. So in your coursework, was there like ancient history? For those who don't know, the the programs between the UK and Europe in general are a little bit different than in North America. So when you say you get a degree in ancient history, did this involve archaeology at all?
Not very much. A little bit. We did like the odd module here and there, but it wasn't proper. Like, we didn't go into the field or anything. I think the most archaeology I did was in a like classroom in a sandpit, if that makes sense. So just brushing. So it's not archaeology because that's fake. Do you know what I mean? So
Well,
learning
it,
methods,
it's
but
it's archaeology-ish.
yeah,
Like for me, I have a degree in anthropology and history. I have two degrees. Well, I have three, but the other one's education, not relevant. But there was no archaeological work in my history degree. It's like completely separated. Were most of your professors older?
yeah, they were all
Yeah.
pretty old. I mean, my first professor was so old he could barely speak. And we did the first thing I ever did was the Epic of Gilgamesh, which
Mm.
now is something I'm actually really interested in because of the
Yeah.
whole connotations with the flood myth, etc., etc. But honestly, it was painful. We had to sit in a seminar room and we just read like line by line around a circle, and each person read like a stanza or whatever you would call a little section.
Mm.
And it was just sitting in a circle reading that, and then it would be like, okay, so what do we think about the Epic of Gilgamesh? And it didn't excite me very much. And he was a super old guy. Uh,
Yeah. Now my
yeah,
education degree is relevant because that is a terrible way to
I
teach.
know it was
Um,
awful. It put me to sleep.
yeah, I think in America, the United States, we would call this classics rather
Yeah,
than
yeah,
ancient history.
yeah.
Yeah. So basically your degree is probably more comparable to a classics degree for people in North America.
More comparable than to archaeology, yeah. But there
Yeah,
were separate classics degrees. There's so many different degrees, but it would definitely be
yeah,
more comparable to classics than to archaeology, I think.
right. Okay. Um, so when you say you didn't do anything on South America, was any of your coursework in North America?
No,
No.
no.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect it to. I'm just getting my bearings about your degree.
Yeah, it was literally
Um,
just the kind of Greece and Rome, and we barely did ancient Egypt as well, which kind of astounded
that's a
me.
bit so very little on ancient Egypt. But yeah, that does sound very classics to me. I'm surprised that there's a separate classics degree. For that. So where does so they don't mention any of the newer work, but where do you learn about Graham Hancock then and these alternative theories?
But that was fully throughout my own research, I guess you'd call it. But I
Hmm.
think whether the seed was first planted in my mind when I did a course called Catastrophe, which was kind of the only thing in the whole course that actually got me thinking. Not the other stuff got me thinking, but this was the only thing that got me like really thinking. But it was a course called Catastrophe, a term length module we called them, and this was all about how natural disaster effectively can massively impact human civilization. And
Mm.
knowing what I know now, this was like massively underplayed. But basically, they were talking about the Bronze Age collapse was the case study,
Yes, I figured that
and
that's where it was going.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it was basically about how different factors combined to possibly cause the Bronze Age collapse, such as drought, possibly earthquakes, and others, environmental factors that brought down a highly sophisticated, interconnected collection of civilizations around, when was it? My memory's tough now. I think 1000 BC or 1100 BC, something like that. That might be completely wrong. I'm sure
No,
someone will,
my
someone will
my
probably
initial reaction was like 3500, so like 1500 BC, but you're probably right because you
in
know
that
it better.
ballpark.
Yeah, 12th century BC. You got it exactly right.
There we go. There we go. Some of it's
Yeah.
still in there.
And that was based on an like that civilization or the multiple civilizations was based on interconnectedness of trading for tin, essentially,
Yeah,
was
yeah,
the main
effectively.
resource
Yeah, and other
to
things. But
make
yeah,
bronze.
they were super interconnected and really sophisticated for their time. Kind of the main part of civilization at that point. I mean, you could argue that in China other things were going on, but
Right.
wouldn't doesn't
But
matter at all.
separate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah. It
So
would have been Shang Dynasty or pre-Shang Dynasty in China. They had like they really cool, interesting. I did a lot of East Asian history. My favorite professor was an East Asian history professor, but um oracle bones, they used to like the ancient, like almost mythical Chinese civilization pre Qing dynasty, pre Han dynasty was like based around reading the like what, turtle shells. The oracle bones were, I got to get that right, but yeah, different stuff than the Bronze Age collapse. No, this was at the time of the Shang Dynasty until 1046 BC. Interesting.
There we go.
Ox scapula or turtle undershells used for divination in ancient China. Yeah, cool stuff. I don't know if you ever heard of that, but
No, I mean we didn't. Yeah, exactly. We didn't do any ancient China either.
you
It
didn't
was
do any
very
China.
no. It was very focused on the Hellenistic civilizations.
So
Um,
ancient history, barely any on Egypt, none on China.
yeah, I mean maybe the
That's
barely
just
any on
classics,
Egypt
man.
is. Yeah, I know it basically is classics, isn't it? I think maybe the barely any on Egypt's a bit unfair. There was bits on Egypt, but
But when it's
yeah,
bits on Egypt, is it Ptolemaic, like Hellenic Egypt, or is it
it was on
pre?
the whole thing to be fair. But
Okay,
I struggle to remember, but I feel
that's
like it
fine.
was very much exactly coming towards the era where the Romans and the Greeks were there. So
Okay,
it's basically his
yeah.
classics thinking about it. But that was the only thing, that was the best course I could do for this kind of stuff, except for, I guess, archaeology. But then I'm not even sure that would focus on ancient history either. So
It, it
anyway,
it might, but it also might not at all. It could
exactly.
be like archaeology can be historic period archaeology goes into the 19th century AD.
Yeah.
Um, so you had this class on catastrophe. Was there, and we'll get away from your degree. Obviously, we're not here to talk about our undergrad degrees, which are, very basic. But when they have a class on catastrophe, is there any discussion about the academic debate between catastrophism and gradualism?
No, no, and it wasn't real catastrophe, to be honest with you. I mean, it was, but it wasn't like the kind of levels we're talking about here. If you look at the work of Randall Carlson and other people in this space talking about
Right.
the absolutely like earth-shattering events that have occurred during human history, it wasn't about that at all. It was about how environmental factors could bring down a civilization or multiple civilizations, such
Right.
as the case study of the Bronze Age collapse, and also the fact that we don't really know exactly what happened there. That's just our best theory, and yeah, it was likely a combination of these factors. But it was that that really got me kind of thinking about this idea that things outside of human control could bring down even the most advanced societies, and that
Yeah.
kind of planted that seed in my mind. And then it was as I was kind of researching that that I came across these ideas of catastrophe possibly wiping out earlier human cultures. And that's how I kind of got into all these theories. And then through that research, I realized just how minor the things we were talking about with the Bronze Age collapse were. And then
Right.
that made me think, well, if that was totally minor, on relatively speaking, and that brought down all these relatively advanced, interconnected, sophisticated societies that we know about in recorded history, what would way worse catastrophic events from prehistory have done to the people that lived at that time, the supposedly more primitive people, but possibly not?
Hmm.
And that, yeah, that just got that seed in my mind and made me think, like, how could we even know what devastating effects some of these events that we know happened would have happened on the humans that we know were living at that time? And that's what really got me into these theories.
Yeah. So did you, if you remember, did you learn about Hancock's theories first or Randall Carlson's?
I can't remember, I think it was
Yeah.
all kind of around the same time. Um, I can't really remember who I got into first, but both of them basically around that
Yeah.
time, midway through my degree.
Did you get
Um,
anywhere into like, because I'm North American, I'm from the US. So our like, you probably didn't learn about the Clovis first controversy until much later
yeah, that
because
wasn't
it's
until
not,
I was fully in in it, all in on the theories.
yeah.
But yeah, I didn't know anything about that. We didn't do anything about North American history, so I only learned about that whole debate and how that's changed later on when I was fully diving in.
Yeah, that makes sense. For me, it was like, I was learning about Native Americans in like primary school, elementary school. So, because I wouldn't blame you guys for not talking about that because it's not your area. But um, so did you learn at any point, of course not during your degree, but about the megafauna extinction in the Americas?
I haven't learned about that. Yeah, not in official education. I know a fair amount about it due to my own research, and I think the whole human extinction idea is bizarre because it doesn't
Human
make sense.
extinction?
Or as in that the humans killed them all, because that's
Oh,
kind of
right.
the prevailing theory. Sorry, that was a really bad way of phrasing that, but
No,
the
no, I get it.
the kind of prevailing theory, at least has been, and I think possibly still is, that it was these humans, the Clovis culture and others, that basically wiped out not just all the woolly mammoths, but also all the big, large predators and
Yeah.
all the megafauna at that
Like
time.
78% of the megafauna in
Yeah,
North America and like 68 in South America. It's give or take. But
yeah,
yeah,
and at the same time, they're telling us that these were really small populations of kind of nomadic people that moved through the continent, somehow exterminating every single big animal in the space of a few, I don't even know, like 1,000 years, maybe less. Not quite sure.
like 1,000, 1,500, I think. Yeah.
And then obviously also these animals somehow got wiped out so quick they couldn't reproduce. Yeah, so I think that's just clearly not correct.
It made sense to me before I started studying more of it. And when it did make sense to me was when you have like relatively at the time advanced people that are like everywhere else in the world, there's tens of thousands of years of human evolution that happens in tandem with the animals around them. So the humans are technologically advancing at the same time that those animals are living with them. And when I believed, because even though Clovis first was made to be, by the words of anthropologists and archaeologists, they would say that in the 90s they decided that Clovis first is not real and there were pre-Clovis peoples in the US. I was still taught, like even up until high school, that Clovis was the first culture in the Americas. And I didn't get the memo. And then this was like 2010. My teachers were still teaching me this. Um, and it made sense to me that people come in with relatively advanced technology that the animals in North and South America didn't didn't have any resistance to, any understanding of, that they would be made to be extinct. But once I learned more, it makes no sense at all, because if people were living there for tens of thousands of years, then the animals would have had time to understand living around humans.
And also, it doesn't make sense with the predators. I can understand kind of the mammoths, maybe, but these huge, like saber-toothed, I'm not exactly sure on the species name. I'm not an expert at all, but these huge predators that you probably wouldn't go anywhere near if you had the choice, and you're probably not going to be hunting them for food because there's lots of other options. So how on
Right.
earth are you wiping out the entire population of two continents of multiple large predators in a short span of time? Doesn't add up, in my
It
opinion.
it doesn't make sense. And that right there, the megafauna extinction for me is probably the biggest piece of evidence that tells me that something else happened. And
Yeah,
there's no good explanation for that. There's plenty of other smaller things, but to me, that's the one thing where I'm like, archaeology and history does not explain why this happened. So there has to be another explanation. And that's really where it comes down to for me, is that there are I don't know what the answer is, and I don't know who has the answer, but I know that the people who are claiming to have the answer, they're not definitely right enough for me to say that they're correct, you know?
yeah, agreed. And I think the kind of alignment with the Younger Dryas doesn't is a hell of a coincidence, because that was whatever you think caused the Younger Dryas. It was a
Hmm.
severe climatic episode on the planet's history, because that, I
Right,
mean, that's undebatable. We have the data for that. It was clearly
right,
like a dramatic climate shift twice, and a very horrible period for 1,000 years in between. The fact that that
right.
coincides with the megafauna extinction would make you think that it was the climate or some event or multiple events that caused the megafauna extinction, not small groups of prehistoric humans roaming around, slaughtering every single animal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't buy it, but hey.
I don't buy it either. It doesn't make sense. So just so everyone knows, the Younger Dryas, people don't disagree that the Younger Dryas happened. They disagree over how catastrophic it was, like whether it was based on an impact theory, whether it was based on a lot of impacts of comets, asteroids, whatever. I'm not an astronomer. Um, or whether it was a more gradual change, whether there was a kind of immediate change. And isn't there? There's some finds of like a mammoth or a mastodon that was found like flash frozen, like
Yeah,
still meaty. You know about that, right?
yeah, like it had
So
been
how does that
frozen in
happen?
an afternoon or something,
Right. Like
which
it would
makes no
have to be.
sense if it's
It
not a
doesn't make any
really
sense.
dramatic event.
Yeah.
Otherwise, how could that happen? And it still had like undigested food in its system or something. I'm not sure if that's
Yeah.
100% right, but it's something like that. So that suggests that everything was fine, and then everything wasn't fine in the space of hours rather than weeks or years or whatever. So
Right. But that was in Siberia, I'm finding. Undigested food in their stomachs, but it still points to a global catastrophe as it was, which, you know, if you adhere to the impact theory, which is something that I don't necessarily believe in, but I don't necessarily not. Excuse me. It's just one of those things that I don't feel comfortable deciding on myself. I don't have the background in that. But if you believe in that theory of the impacts, this is a piece of evidence that supports it. And the idea that it hit North America but affected the globe and affected the Americas more than it affected other places. So, what is your take on what makes an advanced civilization, if
well,
you know what I mean? And you can ask for clarification if you need it.
no, I know what you mean. I mean, I think so. We have the kind of mainstream definition of what a civilization is, right? Which is pretty solid, and it's basically well, I can try list off the characteristics from my head, but I think it's agriculture, cities, trade, um, shared kind of cultural identity, symbolism, architectural styles, um, and like social hierarchy and
Right.
specialization. So those are the kind of key characteristics of what a civilization is defined as by mainstream history. I think that's fair enough. It's based very strongly on the societies that the early civilizations that we see from Mesopotamia. And that's kind of our blueprint for what a civilization is, which is fine because they are
Mhm.
kind of the earliest civilizations that we have proven to have found and that exist. But I think perhaps it's a slightly limited model for defining what a sophisticated human society could be
Mhm.
because just if a human society doesn't match like one or two of those criteria, it could still be extremely sophisticated and advanced, but wouldn't be defined as civilization. But to be honest, there are civilizations that don't meet those criteria that are still defined as civilization. So it's a bit of a confusing one. I think where I'm getting to with this is obviously Göbekli Tepe,
Right.
which is not defined as a civilization, but matches many of the criteria from that list. The only ones it doesn't match is cities. We have no evidence for cities at Göbekli Tepe. And it doesn't match our agricultural surplus, but there's also growing evidence that there was agriculture in that region at that time.
Yeah.
It's disputed evidence, but I think there's a fair body of evidence that people maybe did start farming at that time, or at least just after that time in that area. But either way, the point is that I've been trying to make is that just because Göbekli Tepe doesn't meet every single criteria of the mainstream definition of civilization, it still matches many of the others. And the ones that it doesn't meet are heavily implied by the kind of architecture that's left behind. So, for example, we see no evidence of large population centers, but we see a huge site of monumental architecture that has been built by someone.
Mhm.
And just because we haven't found the literal remains of a city from 12,000 years ago doesn't mean that that was built by a few hundred people. I mean, it could have been, it's possible, but it also implies a large group of people working together in a sophisticated manner, probably organized by some sort of hierarchy, because that's one of the other ones that people point at as being disproving Göbekli Tepe as a civilization. They say there's no evidence of social hierarchy, but I would argue how could you organize a large group of people to create a incredibly impressive monument with no social hierarchy? It's unlikely they were just some perfect utopian kind of united society where everyone just
Yeah.
did what they wanted.
How could it be if you have to
Exactly,
organize people to work together? It's not like it
exactly.
and I guess it is possible. The mainstream view on Gobekli Tepe is that it was built by hunter gatherers, and I it could have been built in part by hunter gatherers, but like you, I don't really buy that. As long as I'm understanding you correctly, I don't really buy that a hunter gatherer society in general was able to just start building that, to just out of nowhere decide we're going to start building megalithic structures. Based on what I know about hunter gatherer societies from North America that I've studied,
Yeah,
um, the social cohesion, there's a lack of political complexity there in growing a a civilization or a culture that's capable of making this large scale megalithic structures. But there are other places around that area that are being discovered now, like Karahan Tepe, and I think there's, excuse me, like a dozen other sites in the area. So I think we're only going to learn more. Um, what's your take on, like, 95% of Gobekli Tepe has not been excavated?
yeah.
Why?
It's frustrating, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
frustrating. I mean, my take on this is that that probably is standard architectural archaeological practice, is to excavate a site slowly. Like if you look at many of the kind of big sites around the world, it's taken a long time to excavate them, and it's a very slow thing. And they often do take that approach to kind of excavate a little bit of it, and then they will use that to kind of extrapolate out across the whole site and what they
Right.
learned. However, I'm not 100% sure I agree with this, and I don't agree with this in the case of Göbekli Tepe at all, because Göbekli Tepe is arguably the most important archaeological discovery ever, or at least in modern times, because of what it represents, which is a very sophisticated society, dare we say civilization from 12,000 years ago. So I feel like maybe a site as significant as Göbekli Tepe should warrant extra archaeological attention. I don't really buy the idea that we are saving it for future generations who have better technology, because we have very sophisticated technology right now. We could 100% excavate the whole thing. If it was some random site from the first century BC, from a culture that we already knew from the ancient Greeks or from the ancient Romans that we knew a lot about, I would understand that. I'd be like, fair enough. We don't want to damage this site. It's a cool site. We've got a little bit from it. We know some stuff. Let's leave it until maybe there's some crazy new innovations in archaeological excavation. But with Göbekli Tepe, it's such a paradigm shifting site, such a absolutely shocking discovery that could teach us so much about prehistoric humans, about the origins of civilization, about how people lived in the Neolithic and even before the Neolithic. It seems bizarre to only excavate 5 to 10% of that. And I think that was done in the first like decade, and then ever since then it's basically been nothing. And
First few decades before it
yeah,
became such a prominent site, and there really hasn't been a lot done. I mean, as far as if you listen to the site, it hasn't been updated. They still say 95%, which is of course a estimate, right? Just based on the number, it's an estimate, but there hasn't been much more excavation there. There is something to be said, like you said, this is pretty standard in archaeology, but a lot of that, a lot of the reason for that is because doing archaeology is such labor intensive work. Like when you do archaeology, and you haven't done any digs yourself, right? Which is totally
no,
fine. But I have. And you're going down in 1 meter. Sometimes you do trenching, you do a few different things, but generally you have 1 meter square, so 1 meter by 1 meter, and you go down 10 centimeters at a time, meticulously documenting what's there. And because of that, it takes a very long time and it takes a lot of labor, but there is the willingness, the interest, and the funding to provide that labor, and yet it's not happening. And one of the reasons I think that this is happening is because archaeologists in general, the field tends to be extraordinarily interested in they're obsessed with trash heaps. Like they're just obsessed with middens, like piles of trash, essentially, that give us these data points that 21st century archaeology is so obsessed with. And there seems to me to in the field, not necessarily all the individuals, but they're not as interested in, for example, the symbology that's on these excavated megalithic structures and what that could tell us, what's already been told to us based on what we've seen on the 5% of Gobekli Tepe that has been excavated is extraordinary. Relating to astronomy and relating, that tells us a lot about the civilization, but that the field is not interested in. And that's very frustrating.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, as you say, literally, we've learned so much about this time period and it's changed our understanding of human history so much. And it's only been 5% of the site. It's crazy. And I always think, like, what if there's an artifact hiding in the excavated 95% that's the equivalent of like the Rosetta Stone that completely shifted our understanding of ancient Egypt? One singular artifact that allowed us to basically learn the vast majority of what we know about ancient Egypt. That was one thing that we found. If we could find the equivalent artifact in Göbekli Tepe, that could teach us so much about the Tash Tepela culture, which is what they're starting to call it, which I believe will be classified as a civilization one day. And also, by definition of when this culture was, it would change everything about human history. So I think that we maybe should be paying a bit more or putting a bit more effort into trying to excavate this site slightly faster than the kind of archaeological norm due to its significance and what it could mean about our human past, because I think it could change everything. And it already has changed everything, to be honest. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right. And in the ways, I mean, one of the ways it's changed everything, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to, when we're at the end, we're going to spend some time just for the Patreon, and I'll ask you some more conspiratorial questions then, basically, as long as you're okay with that.
Yeah.
But, sorry, what was the last thing you said?
I think I was just complaining about them not excavating Göbekli Tepe.
This is what I started to say. Cleveland. I disagree with their take that this was done simply by hunter-gatherers, and it seems to be that they base that off of, we have no evidence of agriculture at Gobekli Tepe, so that means, it was built by hunter-gatherers, with no further explanation, even though that explanation to me it's not sufficient, and it's just based on an absence of evidence rather than evidence itself. And that is not a good answer to me. And it's not a good answer for a number of reasons. But one of them is that if we're talking about a larger culture, then this could have been a site that was, it was a site that had some sort of specific purpose. Like, for example, I'm very interested in the Mayans. And the Mayans, I've been to a few Mayan sites that are around the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. And one of the sites that I've been to that I really like is on an island called Cozumel, I think. And this site, the archaeologists think that it was like a fertility temple. It was a place, it was a contextual site that people went to for a specific purpose. Kind of speculation, but people wanted to go there to, like, if they wanted to have kids, they couldn't have kids. They're going to go to the fertility temple, something like that. I'm probably misrepresenting it, but this is what I remember. And if you didn't find anything, if you didn't find Tikal, you didn't find Chichen Itza, you didn't find all these other more famous Mayan sites, these large sites, and you only found Cozumel, and you only found this temple, and you try to extrapolate the civilization based on that temple, then you're going to have a very different understanding of who the Mayans were and what they did. And I don't know if there's been evidence of agriculture found on Cozumel, but maybe there isn't. And that wouldn't tell you that this was built by hunter-gatherers. Obviously, it wasn't. The Mayans were a agricultural people. And it's possible there's another site that's more significant. And one of the things, I remember Flint Dibble, when he was talking to Graham Hancock, talks about like, oh, we have found agriculture at Notre Dame in France. Like this is a ritual site of religious significance, but we found agriculture there. I don't think that's true. I think he just made that up, as he makes up a lot of things. But it, even if that were true, even in our early modern or late medieval civilization, I think when Notre Dame was built, it doesn't tell you anything about French civilization if you just have that site. Um, it's just a damn shame. And we would
Yeah,
know more if we found more, if they were
yeah, and
looking, if
also
they were excavating.
even if they didn't have agriculture, so let's say for the sake of argument, the fact that we see, I think there's 14 sites now in the area, all that have shared symbolism, shared monumental architecture, so presumably we're also interconnected with a shared cultural identity, shared religion. Even if this was some sort of nomadic society that lived off, uh, I don't know, like herd animals or had some way of sourcing food that wasn't agriculture,
Mm-hmm.
this is still a complex, interconnected society with shared symbolic thought, societal organization, hierarchies, and the capability to construct massive, massive, massive sites. Like, even if we don't want to call that civilization because of this definition that's basically based on Mesopotamia, what are we calling that?
Yeah.
Because that isn't that isn't what we've traditionally been taught about hunter gatherers. And either we massively need to kind of change the definition of what hunter gatherers were capable of, which basically is the same thing as saying that these people were a civilization or an early type of civilization. Either way, it doesn't make sense to say that this was just a small nomadic bands of hunter gatherers. Like, what were they doing? Were they building Gobekli Tepe and then going all the way across here to Karahan Tepe and building that? Or it doesn't make sense. It's
It
clearly
doesn't.
a sophisticated, interconnected culture of advanced peoples, and we should give them more credit than they're given. And we should understand that the human story goes much further back into prehistory than is currently accepted.
And there is a limited understanding that we get from putting people into boxes like, oh, these are agricultural people, these are hunter gatherers, these are pastoralists. An example that you probably aren't that familiar with because of your British background, but the Coast Salish people of the Pacific Northwest in the United States and Canada, and Washington and British Columbia. Washington, the United States, British Columbia, Canada, right next to each other on the West Coast. These were people that are ostensibly hunter gatherers. They are they're surviving on fisheries. This provided a large surplus of food, and they do have that makes them hunter gatherers by the definition. But they also had a complex political organization, which has elements that are more related to other hunter gatherers. Like they don't have, as far as I know, like a hereditary leadership structure. They have a more decentralized leadership structure based on redistribution of wealth through potlatches, which is what became the word potluck. That's where potluck comes from. Do you guys have potlucks
We
in
do,
the
yeah, we got
UK? Yeah.
potluck.
This is where potlucks come from. It comes from a potlatch, which is a ceremony of redistribution, and you find other ceremonies of redistribution in places like New Guinea, where they have redistribution of wealth for big men that are leaders on New Guinea. Um, but that civilization, or not civilization, whatever you want to call it, they have milled wood. They have a far-reaching shared culture across hundreds of kilometers, thousands of kilometers, thousands of miles across British Columbia and Washington, and I think into Oregon. And they're making sophisticated buildings. They're making these large totem poles that have a shared art style that you can see most notably in like the American football team, the Seattle Seahawks. Like their hawk is based on that art style. But they were hunter gatherers, which is we come up with these terms and give them definitions. And we do that so that we can compare cultures, but they are limiting, but they also give us an understanding of the people, but they limit our understanding of what people might do based on preconceived notions of what a hunter-gatherer is. So even if these people at Gobekli Tepe in this civilization, they are hunter-gatherers, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the same as, a group of hunter-gatherers from the eastern woodlands who are doing some amount of trade, but they don't have the level of political complexity that even the Coast Salish people have, or definitely the civilization of Gobekli Tepe or the culture of Gobekli Tepe implies based on what they created.
And Gobekli Tepe is so big. It's so
really
big. Like, it's not like it doesn't really make sense that it would have been constructed by a small group of people. Even if they were doing it over years and years and years, it still seems bizarre, because why would you make it so big? Why would you need it to be so big? If you wanted a place to gather, let's say, for some sort of ritualistic reason to do ceremonies or whatever, it doesn't need to be 50 times larger than Stonehenge. Like, the size of Stonehenge is fine. Yeah, it's 50 times larger than Stonehenge.
Holy
and
crap.
Stonehenge is pretty big. Well, it's not that big, but I mean, it's big for 12,000 years ago. Not Stonehenge being 12,000 years ago, Gobekli Tepe, but
right.
The sheer size of Gobekli Tepe, to me, is really, really suggests that this was a larger population of people than we assume, and the fact that there's all these other sites that all appear interconnected across a relatively big region suggests that this was a large population of interconnected people, which, if this was found and dated to 2000 BC, this would be considered a civilization. But it's not. It's dated a lot earlier, so we can't call it a civilization.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So let's get on a somewhat related topic with Gobekli Tepe as the jumping off point. Recently, Zahi Hawass went on Joe Rogan, and I
was hoping
I'm the scientist. I'm not the scientist. I'm the scientist.
Yeah, good fun.
Yeah, I made it. I don't know if you saw the video that I made, but I made a short video of Zahi Hawass saying
Schrodinger's scientist.
Schrodinger's scientist. Yeah. So, do you see any relation between Gobekli Tepe, and there's a long time difference, or there's a lot of time between Gobekli Tepe and ancient Egypt, even early ancient Egypt. But do you see any relation there? And they are separated by a pretty far distance, but based on the expansiveness of the culture that created Gobekli Tepe, it's not like Egypt is far enough away that they wouldn't have had contact with them, or at least contact with people that had contact,
Oh yeah, I mean, if people would have been connected from those two regions, at least in the ancient Egyptians' time. And Gobekli Tepe, we've seen evidence of tool styles coming all the way from Siberia, which is like way, 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 way further away. So that suggests,
really?
It's I can't remember exactly what they found, but I don't think it's a tool exactly, but I think it's a style of tool that comes
you're
from.
Saying tall?
Tool.
Sorry. No, I'm British. I'm pretty good with accents, but yeah, tool. Okay.
So that suggests some range of interconnectedness with populations miles away in Gobekli Tepe, from Gobekli Tepe. But anyway, to move on to your question, I don't think there's a connection as such between the ancient Egyptian civilization and the culture that built Gobekli Tepe. But I do think the presence of Gobekli Tepe around 12,000 years ago suggests that similar things could have been occurring in the region of ancient Egypt, and possibly they were connected, which kind of builds into the argument that the ancient Egyptian civilization went back a lot further into history than we've traditionally been taught, or potentially is building upon the kind of remnants of a supposed lost civilization that could have existed much earlier than the kind of ancient Egyptian dynasties that are traditionally accepted as the ancient Egyptian civilization. I don't think there was a connection, like a through line between the ancient Egyptians and whoever built Gobekli Tepe. I mean, they're separated by what,
4 or 5 thousand years.
yeah, at least,
It's a lot,
yeah.
maybe
So,
more.
but there could have
But
been a culture that existed at the same time as Göbekli Tepe or before in the area of ancient Egypt that were advanced, and their kind of cultural memory was what kind of led to the development of the ancient Egyptian civilization. And I mean, there's so many mysteries about ancient Egypt. Like,
yeah,
yeah, it's bizarre. It's bizarre. And one of the funniest things about the Zahi Hawass interview was when he didn't know what Zep Tepi is. I just
yeah.
couldn't fathom that. I like that is the most basic. He's meant to be the spokesperson for ancient Egyptian history, and he hadn't heard of Zep Tepi. That was
He
like the
he
first class we
claimed
did.
to not know what Zep Tepi was.
He must know
He
what it
cl-
is. Even
he
if he
must
doesn't
know what
believe
it
that it's
is.
real, if he believes
Yeah.
it's myth, like fair enough. But he must. He didn't. He said he hadn't heard of it though. I couldn't believe that. Maybe I misheard it, but
No, he did say that he hadn't heard of it. I had a guy, so I have a very, very diverse audience from different places. And I did have a guy who made a comment which made me think, I wish I remembered who the guy was, but he did mention that there are maybe some linguistic differences,
yeah,
like
possibly.
because he speaks Arabic as a first language, it's possible that some of the things that he was saying literally in English, they mean one thing to us, but if translated literally into Arabic, they mean something slightly different, which changes what he was saying a lot. I can't say that for sure because I don't speak Arabic. I don't understand that. I don't understand the intricacies of that, but that would not be a necessarily far-fetched idea.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, I hope it's something to do with the language barrier or something like that, because surely
yeah,
he understands the kind of creation myth of ancient Egypt, considering he's the main guy for ancient Egypt. You'd hope so,
yeah,
but
yeah.
who knows?
So do you want to talk at all about what Zep Tepe is for people that don't know? Because I'm not very, I understand what it is, but I'm not very familiar with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm no, and by no means an expert at all.
Right.
But it's effectively the time before the dynasties in ancient Egypt. The ancient Egyptians had a whole record of this, which is known, which is kind of portrayed by modern historical thinking as myth. So they had all these kind of mythical rulers or gods up until the time of the first dynasty, and then the gods became human and became historically accurate according to the kind of mainstream view. What a lot of people argue is that that is a complete modern interpretation, and that the
Mhm.
Egyptians made no such distinction because they didn't. There's a couple of what are they from? There's the Palmero stone, which depicts Egyptian king list going way back, like 30,000 years into history. And there's the Turin king list, I believe, is another one. Um, and I think there's one more, but I can't remember. But yeah, these historical records from the ancient Egyptians themselves talk of a time long before their own civilization where effectively the gods walked the earth. And mainstream thinking takes this as complete mythological nonsense. But the ancient Egyptians made no such distinction. And a lot of people argue that perhaps the gods who walked the earth in an earlier time doesn't refer to literal gods, but refers to perhaps more advanced people that achieved great things, and then they apparently all left or died, which is a weird thing for gods to do. Gods don't usually die
No,
when
not usually.
no, so it's a weird thing. Um, but yeah, the Egyptians themselves made no distinction that these gods were mythological. The current mainstream thinking is that they are, and the Egyptian history started with the first dynasty. But it's definitely an interesting oddity in the kind of Egyptian story, and also when lined up with ancient Sumerian king lists, which do the exact same thing. They go back way, 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 like 30,000 years, and again they're depicted as being myth until we get to the kind of the start of civilization around 3000 BC when conveniently they
Once we
became
have
humans.
physical evidence.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I mean, I'm not an expert on the mythology of ancient Egypt at all, to be honest.
It's okay.
But yeah,
We're
that's my
just two
understanding.
YouTubers talking about
Yeah,
PhDs. That's
basically,
fine.
yeah,
That's what we do.
that's what we do.
Um, so, in my opinion, I won't even share my opinion. I assume we're somewhat aligned, but I won't alter your answer by saying this. What do you think the place of ancient myth is broadly in any place in understanding our history? And by our, I mean human history, any
Yeah,
civilization, not just Western.
more more useful and a more valuable resource than it's traditionally been considered by the mainstream because it's just dismissed. It's always been completely dismissed as a historical record, but it is the historical record if you think about it because it's the only thing that we have preserved as a species. And you'd think that we'd preserve, important messages because otherwise they wouldn't survive the test of time. So
And
to
possibly
completely
not literally, right?
yes, yeah, well, almost certainly not literally because they wouldn't. It'd be very hard for that to kind of pass the test of time, as I say, if it was a literal, because a literal meaning can be quite specific to the time period. But I think myths are extremely powerful. I think we both accept this and simultaneously don't accept this at the same time. Because if you look at religion, a lot of people obviously take a lot of power from religion, and people think that religions are good things to live by. But then at the same time, we say, but it's all completely myth. It's all completely useless when discussing the past. So I don't really understand that. I think that we need to look at myth. Obviously, you can't use myth as literal, solid evidence because it is just stories, and also it's our interpretation of
Mm-hmm.
stories, which adds another kind of layer to uh, kind of clouding our understanding of what the messages mean. But to not analyze them at all, I think is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Especially when we see so many similarities between different myths from different cultures. You would think that would speak to a kind of truth if different cultures, especially ones that are completely unconnected, all kind of say similar things. You would think maybe this is based on something that actually happened, or based on a real lesson, based on a real moral, based on a real story. So I think myths should definitely be taken seriously. And yeah, I think people like Graham Hancock are doing great work in kind of bringing that idea to the forefront because it is the kind of cultural memory of our species and
Mm.
cultural memory of different groups of people. So to completely discount that as just, oh, that was them just making up nonsense because they didn't know how the world worked, it's like, no. And also, we don't know how the world works. Like we don't know what this universe is. So who are we to
Yeah.
say that their myths were nonsense?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I just had I went to a bar like 2 nights ago, and the bar is owned by some Nepalese people. And I was the only one in this bar for like 3 hours. And I sat there eating a cheeseburger and drinking beers with these two Nepalese guys for 3 hours. It was one of my favorite nights in recent memory. It was a great time. Um, so we talked a lot, like, I started asking them questions about Nepal, which I know very little about. Of course, it's like between India and China, and I understand that that is not a good place to be for a small country, between two large, powerful countries that want to screw with you. Um, but I remember this guy, one of the things, we talked about a lot of things, music, history, culture, the geopolitics of the area, but eventually the guy says like, it's like, do you believe in Jesus and like the resurrection and everything? And I'm like, yeah, I believe in it. Yeah. And he's like, okay, if you didn't, I wasn't going to tell you this, but, and he starts telling me about the mythology of Nepal. And he was like talking, I think he said like this ancient mythical figure like took a sword and like broke these mountains in half. And I was like listening. And I'm really glad I said yes to him on that, because if not, he wouldn't have told me about like the mythology of the place. But it's I say that to say that like a lot of people, they're against, especially in the modern world, against these interpretations of like I don't know if Jesus was actually resurrected. I don't know, but I believe in a separate truth from science that happened. And in the same way, I believe, or at least I believe that they believe in the same way that I believe in the resurrection, that this guy actually split this mountain in half with a sword. Um, but at the same time, a more literal example would be like, Rapa Nui, Easter Island, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the Easter Island myth of the origin myth of their culture, they talk about how these Moai heads were walked to their final resting spot, where they stand on these platforms. So you have these Moai statues, and that doesn't make any sense. That stone statues, if you're just understanding stone statues as being animate objects, that they walked to where they were standing, like where they ended up. But what the older theories about how these statues got to where they were is they bring up these same modern ideas of how we might move a large piece of stone given their level of technology, like on wooden rollers, like logs that they roll the statue to where it lands. But that doesn't explain why there's a bunch of broken statues all over the island that just sit where they are. So doing experimental archaeology to understand how this happened, they make like some archaeologists on Rapa Nui, or maybe they did it somewhere else. They decided instead of trying to use rollers, they're going to tie ropes to the statue and pull side to side the statues and slowly move the statue. And when you do it like that, when you're pulling side to side on the rope, it goes left and right and left and right, and it almost looks like it's walking. So because this archaeologist was willing to go back and look at the myth and understand what's the truth in this myth, they were able to figure out, like, this is probably how they moved them because it says in the myth. And I feel like there are ways to understand other myths in the same way.
Yeah,
that probably doesn't give you a lot to go off of, but
no, and I think, to be honest, it all kind of speaks to a bit of a modern arrogance, and that kind of applies to this whole debate. We kind of think we have everything figured out in our modern world, and we're super smart, and we know everything. And these ancient cultures didn't know much; they had to make up silly myths to kind of explain away the world. But really, obviously, we're quite technologically advanced, but we still can't really explain reality. We can't explain consciousness, and we just think we have everything figured, and we think we can explain away the whole. We think we can understand the entire past, the whole entire history of humanity, just because we have slightly more advanced technology. And I think that's a really flawed way of looking at everything. I think basically the only thing we know is that we don't know very much at all.
And being willing to say we don't know, and not saying based on smaller amounts of information that this is what definitely happened, or that because we don't have evidence that nothing happened.
It's we try to explain away everything because we think we know everything, but we don't. And that's kind of the big problem I have with mainstream historical thinking, is that they make their interpretation of the past, which is completely fair enough because that's what we all do. But then they say this is the only one, and you can't speculate on anything else, even though there's absolutely no way that they can say that is unequivocally what happened in the past, because we're working on such small evidence when it comes to especially prehistory. So like kind of pre 2000, 3000 BC.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have a monopoly on what happened back then because the evidence is so limited. And one more point about the myths is something I don't know too much about, but there's a book which you probably heard of, you might have heard of, called Hamlet's Mill, which kind of talks about how ancient cultures encoded. I haven't read it, so I don't know, but it's just an interesting thing.
I haven't heard it.
About ancient cultures kind of encoded kind of mathematical and astronomical knowledge into myth. Now I need to read this book because I can't really talk about it because I don't know, but it's definitely an interesting a thing that I've heard a lot of people kind of reference, in that that is evidence. If you can say that ancient cultures encoded kind of knowledge of precession of the equinoxes, and that kind of thing. In
Especially when it matches so
Yeah,
perfectly. The
exactly,
math matches, like
exactly.
the size, like of the pyramid, the perfect, almost perfect alignment of the pyramid. Yeah, and that's and they being archaeologists just dismiss that, which is
Yeah,
ridiculous.
yeah. It's completely, that book was completely discredited and
Yeah,
still is.
and this is the thing, like what you said, which has become a common thing that people that have a um, that have a not mainstream view of ancient civilizations. These fields don't have, they should not have a monopoly on thinking about the past. And any sort of, like, Graham Hancock talking about ancient history and what happened is not Graham Hancock trying to do archaeology. It's Graham Hancock trying to understand the past, which is what the archaeologists believe they have a monopoly over, but they don't. They
And
absolutely don't.
the
It belongs
difference
to all
is
of us.
that Graham Hancock's saying maybe this could have happened, and he's just positing a possibility, whereas the kind of mainstream are saying this is definitely what happened. You can't dispute this, which is just, you can't say that. And
You're
so that's
right.
why I find the approach of the kind of alternative voices so much more refreshing, because they're saying this is a possibility, this is our interpretation of this evidence. Maybe it could have been like this, and they just get attacked from people who have decided what happened based on the same evidence, which is very limited for everybody because it's so long ago. And yet they decide that this is the box. We have to be in this box. You can't talk outside this box because we've decided that this is what happened. But no, I don't like that approach at all, because none of us know. None of us know.
Right.
So
And I get this comment all the time. Like, excuse me, like I put out a video that I put out several videos, but whenever I put out something that goes against what Flint Dibble says, there are people commenting in some gotcha, like, why don't you try to disprove Hancock? It's like, well, Hancock does not work within archaeology. I do work within archaeology. I don't work within speculation. I think it's fine that Hancock does work within speculation from outside of archaeology, but like you said, they're saying that it's a fact. So why would I spend any time trying to disprove Hancock, who is not saying that this is what happened definitely? He says himself that it's a hypothesis. Whereas Flint says, and archaeology broadly as a field says, these are the facts. This is what happened. So yeah, I'm going to attack his points if he's saying that this definitely happened. He's making a stronger argument based on things that might not definitely be true. It's a different thing. You have anything to say on that, or I have another question?
just that it's all about interpretation, isn't it? That this isn't a science. Like, history and archaeology use science to date things, for example, but the idea of constructing a story of our past isn't a science at all. It's
No,
interpretation. So you can't say that these people's ideas are. I mean, it depends on what you were talking about. Like, obviously, if
it's
someone says
definitely
something,
not a hard science.
yeah, it's definitely not a
Like
hard science.
forensic archaeology,
Hmm.
sure, but
Yeah,
like not like any sort of archaeology that's talking its interpretation of things, some of which are harder science.
yeah, but it's all, but the actual construction of narratives and ideas is complete interpretation.
Right.
So why do we, if something is definitely provable false, then fair enough, attack that idea because it's wrong. But most of these things, they're not, you can't be like, this is definitely false. So allow people to speculate. That's what I think.
Yeah, I agree, and I agree wholeheartedly. A lot. And then the other thing, and we're after this, we'll get into the Patreon. And I want to ask you a few things. I'm excited to ask you these things just for the Patreon that I don't want to have on the radio. So subscribe to the Patreon to get that. But what do you think about the accusations of racism or white supremacy towards people that talk about this stuff?
I think it's just a tactic, isn't it? Used to kind of generate rage and for people to kind of see the headlines and immediately discredit the person that's being attacked as a white supremacist. See, the thing is with like the alternative history space is there is a bit of a history with kind of the odd like person in the past has used these ideas for racist means. Obvious example is
Definitely.
the like believed in Atlantis and all this kind of stuff, and they were trying to find it. But their reason to do so was to prove the superiority of the Aryan race. So
Right.
that's not great, obviously. But that doesn't mean that anyone who's interested in alternative theories is doing it to prove that Aryan people are superior or anything along those lines. But it becomes an easy thing to attach to this space because of those kind of historical ties to certain people that have had those kind of motivations, and also in our current world, especially like the kind of last 5 years, it's become a very easy kind of cancellation mechanism, for want of a better
Right.
phrase. So I feel like that's why it's been leveled at people like Hancock and others, because they just want to shut him up, basically.
And it's deeply unscientific.
Yeah, and if you digest any amount of Graham Hancock's work, you will immediately understand that this man is not racist. He is extremely respectful to cultures across the world. And I mean, if anything, this guy is saying that there was advanced culture at a time before white people. So how, or at least like they weren't a
Yeah.
bit white, the people that he's attributing a potential lost civilization to.
And it kind of was before white people, I think. I
Yeah,
think
I'm not quite
white
sure
people,
when. Yeah, but I think so. Yeah, I'm not quite sure on the facts of that. But
I think it's about the same time where when white people kind of come about. I think it's about 12,000 years ago or something.
either way,
It's
any
not easy to
potential
think.
lost civilization is almost certainly not going to be white people. So a man
Especially
that,
when Graham Hancock talks about the Amazon and Africa as
yeah,
his places that he's talking about.
yeah, literally. So it's a bizarre accusation to level. What they say is that he's like disrespecting indigenous cultures by saying that their monuments weren't built by them. But he's not. He's one. He's fully respecting them. Two, he's not necessarily saying that. He's saying they might have like cultural memory or brought down symbolism from an earlier culture. And
Right.
three, that earlier culture would presumably also have been them, or possibly from a different place. But again, they're not going to be white. So the whole white supremacy allegations is just nonsense, to be honest. And they're just trying to discredit him.
And even if you like people in North Africa, depending on what definition of white you would use, they are white people because they're Caucasian. They're like Arabs are like they're closer to like European people. It's you have to get into the genetics. It's a little complicated, but those are Caucasian people like us. But they weren't in North Africa up until a few thousand years ago. They weren't there. It was other people like the Berbers who are an earlier type of Caucasian people related to like Basque people, which I guess are still white, but it's too complicated. Like people talk about like race is a social construct in a sense. There is a genetic backing behind it, but how we think about race is socially constructed. It's different in the United States as it is in Britain. Like you guys on your census, you have different categories for an Irish person, a English person, and like a Polish person. Those are different categories. Whereas in the U.S., in the United States, and I think Canada on their census as well, Irish, English, Polish, those are all just white.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make any sense. And even when you go into some of the earlier people like Donnelly, which is often cited, Donnelly, I listened to his book. I did it on live. Donnelly was not a white supremacist in the modern sense. He says some racist stuff in that book, some crazy racist stuff in that book, but he was also talking about the civilization. He wasn't talking about an Aryan civilization. Donnelly was talking about a civilization of pre-Aryan people, of those that became Aryans and the people that became Ethiopians and Semites. So, not Aryans, Arabs, Jews, that type of thing. So this, like, if you find a modern white supremacist today, they don't like Jews. They don't like Arabs. They don't like Ethiopians. It's not a one-to-one white supremacist idea.
I think it's just people are just using it to discredit the work of people they don't like. I don't think it's based
Yeah.
on any knowledge of the space, any knowledge of alternative history ideas, any knowledge of for example, Graham Hancock's actual work. It's just
Mhm.
a attack tool to discredit
Yeah.
him and others.
And I have a few videos on my channel that go into the ways that Flint Dibble has misrepresented Graham Hancock. Like in this thread he did before they even met on Joe Rogan, he just misrepresented what was in the series in many different ways. He essentially lied. He either lied or he's extraordinarily incompetent. Personally, I think both. But regardless, yeah, Flint Dibble's a fraud. At me, Flint. Okay. All right. Do you have anything to say before we go onto the Patreon and start talking about the more conspiratorial stuff?
No, other than thank you so much for having me on, and thank you for listening to everyone that isn't to the Patreon. But you should subscribe to Illegitimate Scholars Patreon right now if you're not.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Michael. Yes, you should. All right. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the Patreon. Let's talk on the Patreon. Such a circle jerk type episode, but people will enjoy it.